You know, when you look at Ecuador, from the volcanic peaks of the Andes all the way to the dense Amazon, you realize its story couldn't be anything but intense. It's a history of conquest, rebellion, and a constant, relentless search for identity, all set against one of the most dramatic backdrops on the entire planet. So yeah, this is a story forged in fire.
So that brings us to the big question we're tackling in this explainer. How is a nation even born from the ashes of empires? I mean, what does it take to build something new when your very foundations are the ruins of two mighty civilizations, one just violently wiped out the other? That's the story we're getting into today.
And our story really kicks off with this cataclysmic collision. It's that moment when the huge, incredibly organized world of the Inca Empire runs headfirst into a small, but absolutely ruthless band of Spanish adventurers. This was the event that was going to change the face of South America forever.
Okay, so the timing here is it's everything. You have to understand, the Inca had only just recently conquered the tribes living in what we now call Ecuador. Their grip was still new. And right then, at that exact moment, a devastating civil war breaks out between two brothers, Atahualpa and Huáscar, both fighting for the throne. The entire empire was literally tearing itself apart from the inside, right as a brand new threat was sailing in from the horizon.
I mean, just look at this comparison. It's absolutely staggering. On one side, you've got this massive empire. But, and this is a huge but, it's an empire weakened by a brutal civil war and even more critically by a smallpox epidemic that it swept down from the north, killing the emperor and his heir. And on the other side, Francisco Pizarro's crew, barely 180 guys. But they had steel swords, they had firearms, and the ultimate shock weapon, horses, which the Inca had never, ever seen before.
So Atahualpa, fresh off his victory in the Civil War, agrees to meet these strange foreigners in the town square of Cajamarca. He shows up with thousands of his attendants, mostly unarmed, as a huge display of power. It was a fatal miscalculation. Pizarro had his men hidden all around the square, and on his signal, they just exploded out of the buildings, cannons firing, cavalry charging into this terrified crowd. In just a few hours, the most powerful man in the hemisphere was a prisoner.
In a desperate bid to save his own life, Atahualpa makes his captors an unbelievable offer. He promises to fill a huge room, once with gold, and then twice over with silver. For months, this river of priceless treasures flowed into Cajamarca from every corner of the empire. It was a fortune beyond the wildest dreams of these conquistadors. The final tally was just mind-boggling, over 13,000 pounds of gold.
But let's be real, that ransom was never going to buy his freedom. The Spanish knew that a living emperor was just too dangerous a symbol, so they put him through a total sham trial, convicted him of treason against them, and executed him by strangulation. The divine son of the sun god was dead, and with its leader gone, the vast Inca Empire, completely shocked and confused, was now wide open for the take.
So, what happens next? Well, the Spanish conquest leads to almost 300 years of colonial rule. A brand new, rigid society was built right on top of the old one's ruins. But deep inside that new society, the seeds of another rebellion were already, very slowly, beginning to grow. To understand what happens next, you have to understand this group, the criollos. These were people of pure Spanish blood, but they were born in the Americas. They were the ones who owned the huge estates, they had the money, they had the education. But, and this is the key, all the top jobs, viceroy, governor, bishop, those were all reserved for men born in Spain, the so-called peninsulares. And this created this deep, simmering resentment among the local elite who felt like second-class citizens in their own homeland.
Then, when Napoleon invades Spain in 1808 and actually imprisons the Spanish king, the criollos in Quito see their chance. On August 10, 1809, they kick out the Spanish authorities and form their own government, a junta. But notice the nuance here. They're not declaring independence. They actually declare loyalty to the captive king in Spain. This was more of a cry for autonomy, for the right to govern themselves until the real king came back.
And this was the turning point. That initial rebellion fizzled out. The leaders surrendered after they were promised they wouldn't be harmed, but that promise was a lie. Royalist troops marched in, arrested all the leaders, and when a rescue was attempted, they just went on a rampage. They murdered the captured patriots in their cells and then poured out into the streets, killing hundreds of regular citizens. Any moderate call for just a little autonomy died that day. It was replaced by a burning desire for total, absolute independence.
That massacre basically radicalized the entire movement, but it would still take another decade for the final push to really get going.
This next chapter is all about military campaigns, a brilliant young general, and the very difficult birth of a brand new nation.
So the fire gets relit, not in Quito this time, but in the port city of Guayaquil. They declare independence in October 1820. But they knew they couldn't do it alone. So the great liberator Simón Bolívar sent his most trusted general, Antonio José de Sucre, who showed up the next May. After some early setbacks, Sucre pulls off a strategic masterpiece, capturing the city of Cuenca in February of 22, and that opened the road to the capital for the final showdown.
Sucre's plan for this final battle was just pure genius. Instead of charging straight at the Spanish, he marches his army up the treacherous slopes of the Pichincha volcano, all under the cover of darkness. By dawn, his troops are on the high ground, literally looking down on the Spanish army in Quito. He forced them to come out and fight an exhausting uphill battle, completely on his terms. The result, a total, decisive victory for the Patriots.
So with independence finally won, the territory gets absorbed into Simón Bolívar's Grand Division, Gran Colombia. This was supposed to be a massive super republic that included modern-day Colombia, Venezuela, and Panama as well. It was a really idealistic project, but the reality was the huge distances and these really deep regional rivalries just made it almost impossible to govern effectively.
And sure enough, by 1830, Bolívar's dream was falling apart. Venezuela broke away, the central government was paralyzed, so seeing the writing on the wall, leaders in Quito met up and declared their own independence. And they picked a neutral name for their new country, the Republic of Ecuador, named after the equator, hoping it would help unite the country's rival region.
But winning independence wasn't the end of the struggle. Oh no, it was just the beginning of a whole new one. The new republic was born into an era of complete instability, dominated by a new kind of political figure whose shadow would loom over the country for decades to come.
And that figure is the caudillo. The best way to think of a caudillo is as a powerful general from the independence wars. He's got an army, but that army is loyal to him personally, not to the state or some constitution. In a brand new country with very few stable institutions, that personal military power translates directly into political power. They are the ultimate strongman.
And Ecuador's first and most quintessential caudillo was its very first president, Juan José Flores. He was a Venezuelan general, a hero from the war, and a really shrewd political operator who had the army in his pocket. He really represented both the glory of liberation, but also all the militarism and instability that came along with it.
This right here, this visualizes the country's core conflict perfectly. You had Flores, based on the conservative highlands of Quito, and his main rival was Vicente Rocafuerte, a liberal intellectual from the coastal port of Guayaquil. These two guys fought a civil war against each other, and then they formed an alliance to rule together, literally taking turns as president. It was politics based on personal pacts, not principles.
Well, that bizarre alliance eventually crumbled, mainly under the weight of Flores' own ambition. In 1843, he pushed through a new constitution that was so authoritarian it became known as the Charter of Slavery. It made the presidential term 8 years long and allowed him to be reelected forever. It was such a blatant power grab that it actually united the entire country against.
And this really captures the troubled legacy of that whole founding era. The new republic was saddled with these profound problems right from day one. You had a deep split between conservatives and liberals, that bitter rivalry between the highlands and the coast, a super weak economy, and a political culture that was just dominated by military strongmen. These weren't just growing pains. These were the fundamental fault lines that would define Ecuador for the next 100 years.
So we're left with this crucial question, right? You have a nation born from conquest, then from colonial resentment, then from a chaotic war for freedom, only to be plunged immediately into an age of instability. How does a country like that build a stable future when its very birth was defined by such deep and violent conflict? That is the challenge that would shape the rest of Ecuador's incredible history.